Taman Kim wiped the sweat from his forehead as he walked through the busy corridors of Kepler Station. The massive space station buzzed with activity as traders, diplomats, and workers from dozens of different alien species moved about their daily business. The air recyclers hummed overhead, mixing the scents of exotic foods, fuel, and the metallic smell that always seemed to hang around space stations. At 22 years old, Taman was the youngest engineer aboard the cargo vessel New Sol. His black hair stuck up at odd angles despite his attempts to smooth it down, and his uniform already showed grease stains from the morning's work. His supervisor had sent him to help with loading medical supplies, and Taman was determined not to mess this up. Unfortunately, determination and coordination were two different things entirely. The medical bay's loading dock stretched out before him, filled with carefully organized containers of medicines, surgical equipment, and specialized biological samples. Everything was labeled in multiple languages, with bright warning symbols indicating which items required special handling. Taman checked his tablet twice, confirming that he was supposed to help move Container Section Delta to the transport bay. "Just don't touch anything important," he muttered to himself, remembering his supervisor's exact words. How hard can it be to move boxes from point A to point B? The answer, as Taman would soon discover, was much harder than it seemed. A group of tall, scaled creatures worked nearby, their reptilian features both fascinating and intimidating. These were Sauroch, a species known throughout the galaxy for their strength and military prowess. They moved with fluid grace, their powerful tails helping them balance as they lifted containers that would require 3 humans working together. Their scales ranged from deep green to golden brown, and their large eyes missed nothing as they worked. Taman tried not to stare as he approached his assigned section. The Sauroch were loading their own supplies, medical equipment bound for their homeworlds. Despite their fearsome appearance, they worked with careful precision, handling delicate instruments with surprising gentleness. "Focus, Taman," he told himself, consulting his tablet again. "Container Delta 7 through Delta 15. Simple." The loading system used anti-grav platforms that made moving heavy objects much easier. All Taman had to do was activate the right platform, guide it to the correct containers, and move them to the transport bay. The control panel looked straightforward enough, with clearly marked buttons and a simple display screen. What Taman didn't notice was that he was standing at the wrong control panel. Instead of the standard loading bay controls, he was looking at the emergency containment system for the station's high-security xenobiology section. The panels looked nearly identical, both featuring the same basic layout and color scheme. The only difference was a small warning sign in the upper corner, written in text too small for Taman to read without his glasses, which were currently sitting on his desk back on the New Sol. "Okay," Taman said, pressing what he thought was the activation button. "Platform 7, engage." Nothing happened. He pressed the button again, harder this time. Still nothing. Frowning, Taman leaned closer to examine the display. Maybe he needed to input a code first. He tapped several buttons in sequence, trying to follow the same pattern he had used on other loading systems. The display flickered, showing symbols he didn't recognize. "Come on," he muttered, pressing more buttons. "Work with me here." A soft beep came from the panel, followed by a series of rapid clicks. Taman smiled, thinking he had figured out the system. He pressed what appeared to be a confirmation button. That was his first mistake. The second mistake was pressing it 3 more times when the system didn't respond immediately. Suddenly, red lights began flashing throughout the loading bay. A loud alarm began blaring, the sound echoing off the metal walls and ceiling. Emergency barriers started descending from the ceiling, sealing off different sections of the bay. "Warning," announced the station's computer system in multiple languages. "Emergency containment protocol activated. All personnel evacuate xenobiology section immediately. Warning, emergency containment protocol activated." Taman stared at the control panel in horror as he realized what he had done. This wasn't a loading bay control system at all. The small text he couldn't read had been warning him that this panel controlled the emergency lockdown for the station's most dangerous areas. No, he said, frantically pressing buttons to try to reverse what he had started. "Come on, undo. There has to be an undo button." But it was too late. The emergency barriers had already sealed off the section where he was standing. The lights dimmed to emergency levels, casting everything in an eerie red glow. The alarm continued to blare. though it sounded muffled now through the thick metal barriers. Taman looked around his new prison and felt his stomach drop. He wasn't alone. 3 massive Saurochs stood in the sealed section with him, but these weren't the careful workers he had been watching earlier. These Sauroch were different, bigger, more dangerous looking. Heavy metal restraints hung from their wrists and ankles, clearly marking them as prisoners rather than workers. Their scales were darker, scarred from what looked like many battles, and their eyes held a cold intelligence that made Taman's skin crawl. The largest of the 3 stood nearly 3 meters tall, with deep green scales and arms thicker than Taman's entire body. Scars crisscrossed his snout and neck, and one of his eyes was milky white from some old injury. He turned his massive head toward Taman, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. The second prisoner was slightly smaller but looked even more dangerous. His scales were almost black and his claws were longer than the others, filed to razor points. He crouched low like a predator ready to spring, his tail lashing back and forth behind him. The third Sauroch was the most unsettling of all. He was the smallest of the 3, only about 2.5 meters tall, but his eyes held a cold intelligence that the others lacked. He studied Taman with the focused attention of a scientist examining an interesting specimen. "Oh," Taman said quietly, his voice barely audible over the continuing alarms. "This is not good." The largest Sauroch took a step forward, his clawed feet clicking against the metal floor. "What do we have here?" He rumbled, his voice like rocks grinding together. "A little human, all alone with no guards to protect him." "The lockdown must have caught him by surprise," said the black-scaled one, circling around to block any possible escape route. "How convenient for us." The intelligent one tilted his head, studying Taman more carefully. "Interesting. He doesn't seem to be running or screaming. Most humans would be doing both by now, they were right. Any reasonable person would be terrified, screaming for help, or at least trying to find a way out. Instead, Taman found himself oddly calm. Perhaps it was shock, or maybe he was just too overwhelmed to process the danger properly. "I'm really sorry about this," Taman said, pulling his tablet out of his pocket. "I was just trying to move some containers and I think I pressed the wrong buttons. I'm sure station security will get this fixed soon." The 3 Sauroch exchanged glances, clearly not expecting such a casual response to their threatening presence. "Did he just apologize to us?" asked the black-scaled one. "I think he did," replied the largest. Taman settled down against the wall, opened his tablet, and resumed reading the quantum mechanics textbook he had been working through during his break. If he was going to be stuck here for a while, he might as well make productive use of the time. His engineering certification exam was coming up in 2 weeks, and he still had 3 chapters to finish. The Sauroch prisoners stared at him in complete bewilderment as the human calmly began to study, apparently oblivious to the fact that he was trapped in a small space with 3 of the most dangerous criminals in the sector. Outside the sealed barriers, station security teams were scrambling to understand what had gone wrong and how to fix it. Inside, 3 predators found themselves faced with prey that refused to act like prey at all. This was going to be a very interesting day. The emergency lights continued to flash red as the 3 Sauroch prisoners studied their unexpected cellmate. In all their years of imprisonment, interrogation, and combat, none of them had ever encountered anything quite like this small human, who sat reading as if nothing unusual had happened. The largest prisoner, who had identified himself to his cellmates as Vexitar during their transport, flexed his massive claws and approached the human slowly. His scarred face twisted into what he hoped was a terrifying expression. Most creatures cowered when faced with his full height and bulk. Even other Sauroch took a step back when Vexitar decided to intimidate them. The human didn't even look up from his tablet. "Hey, little soft skin," Vexitar growled, looming over the seated figure. "Do you understand what kind of danger you're in right now?" Taman glanced up briefly, took in the massive reptilian form standing above him, and nodded politely. "Oh, hi there. I'm Taman Kim, junior engineer from the cargo ship New Sol. Nice to meet you." He gestured vaguely at the sealed barriers around them. "Sorry about all this mess. I was trying to activate a loading platform and I think I hit the wrong controls." Vexitar blinked his good eye, completely thrown off by the casual response. "You're sorry?" "Yeah, really sorry. I know this is probably inconvenient for everyone." Taman returned his attention to his tablet. "If you could maybe keep the conversation down just a little bit, I'd really appreciate it." I'm trying to finish this chapter on quantum field fluctuations, and some of these equations are pretty tricky. The second prisoner, whose name was Kresh, circled around to get a better look at this strange human. His black scales rippled as he moved, and his filed claws clicked against the metal floor. He had spent years perfecting his ability to strike fear into the hearts of his enemies. His appearance alone had caused hardened warriors to surrender without a fight. Listen carefully. Human, Kresh hissed, crouching down so his face was level with Taemin's. We are not ordinary prisoners. We are killers, dangerous criminals who have done terrible things. You should be screaming for help or begging for your life. Taemin looked up from his tablet again, this time with a slightly annoyed expression. Look, I'm sure you're all very fierce and everything, but honestly, panicking isn't going to help anyone right now. The security team will figure out how to override the lockdown eventually. Until then, we might as well make the best of it. He held up his tablet, showing the screen to Kresh. See this equation here? It describes how quantum fields interact with normal matter during faster-than-light travel. Pretty fascinating stuff. Did you know that human ships can actually travel faster than most alien vessels? Because we figured out how to stabilize the quantum bubble using a completely different mathematical approach. Kresh stared at the tablet screen, his predatory instincts completely derailed by the human's unexpected enthusiasm for science. The equations meant nothing to him, but the human's genuine excitement was oddly infectious. The third prisoner had been watching this interaction with growing curiosity. Zoldan was different from his cellmates. Where they relied on brute force and intimidation, he preferred to analyze and understand. He had been a researcher once before his crimes had landed him in prison. The human's behavior was unlike anything in his extensive knowledge of alien psychology. Vextar, Kresh, Zoldan said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. Step back. The other two prisoners moved aside as Zoldan approached the human. Unlike his companions, he didn't try to loom or intimidate. Instead, he settled into a sitting position similar to the humans, though his much larger size made the posture look awkward. You are not afraid, Zoldan observed. It wasn't a question. Taemin looked up from his reading and considered the statement seriously. I mean, I probably should be afraid, right? You guys are pretty big and scary looking, but honestly, being afraid won't help me understand quantum mechanics any better, and I've got this certification exam coming up in 2 weeks. He gestured around the sealed chamber. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? Either station security gets the lockdown fixed and we all go back to what we were doing, or we're stuck here until they figure it out. Either way, I might as well use the time productively. Zoldan tilted his head, studying the human more carefully. What is this certification you speak of? Oh, it's for advanced engineering principles, Taemin said, his face lighting up with enthusiasm. I'm trying to become a certified quantum drive specialist. It's really complicated stuff, but once you understand the basic principles, it all starts to make sense. He scrolled through his tablet, showing different pages to Zoldan. See, most people think faster-than-light travel is just about going really fast, but it's actually about folding space-time so you can take a shortcut from one place to another. The quantum drive creates a bubble of altered space around the ship, and then... Taemin paused, looking at Zoldan's interested expression. Sorry, I'm probably boring you with all this technical stuff. No, Zoldan said slowly. Continue. This is... interesting. Vextar and Kresh exchanged confused glances. In all the time they had spent with Zoldan during transport, they had never seen him show genuine interest in anything. The intellectual prisoner usually spent his time staring at the walls or making cryptic comments about the nature of reality. Really? Taemin asked, clearly pleased to have found someone interested in his studies. Okay, so the tricky part is maintaining the quantum coherence while the ship is in transit. If the field destabilizes, you could end up scattered across several different dimensions, which would be really bad. He pulled up a new screen showing a complex three-dimensional diagram. Human engineers solve this problem by using what we call harmonic resonance stabilizers. Instead of trying to force the quantum field to stay stable, we work with its natural fluctuations and use them to actually strengthen the overall field structure. Zoldan leaned closer, studying the diagram with growing fascination. In his previous life as a researcher, he had worked on similar problems, though from a very different angle. The human's approach was completely unlike anything he had encountered in Sorok science. This harmonic resonance, Zoldan said carefully. How do you calculate the proper frequencies? Oh, that's the really cool part, Taman said, his eyes bright with excitement. It turns out that every ship has a unique resonance signature based on its mass, structure, and even the materials it's made from. You have to tune the stabilizers to match that specific signature, kind of like tuning a musical instrument. He swiped through several more screens, showing mathematical formulas and engineering diagrams. The calculations are pretty complex, but once you get the hang of it, you can actually feel when everything is working right. The whole ship kind of hums when the quantum field is perfectly aligned. Kresh had been listening to this conversation with growing bewilderment. Are you telling us that human ships are faster than Sauroch vessels? Well, I don't want to brag or anything, Taman said modestly. But yeah, human quantum drives are generally more efficient than most other designs. We can travel about 30% farther on the same amount of fuel, and our transit times are usually shorter too. Vextar growled low in his throat. Impossible. Sauroch technology is superior to all other species. Maybe in some areas, Taman agreed pleasantly. I'm sure you guys are way better at lots of things. But humans have always been pretty good at figuring out creative solutions to complicated problems. My grandmother always says that knowledge is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you. The three Sauroch fell silent, each processing this information in their own way. The small human continued reading his tablet, occasionally making notes or highlighting important passages. The emergency lights continued to flash, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear the faint sounds of station personnel working to resolve the lockdown. What none of them realized yet was that this accidental meeting would change all of their lives in ways they could never have imagined. 2 hours had passed since the lockdown began, and the emergency lights had finally stopped flashing. The chamber had settled into a dim, steady glow that made everything look strange and dreamlike. Outside, they could hear the distant sounds of station, personnel working frantically to override the containment system. Taman had finished 3 chapters of his quantum mechanics textbook and had moved on to studying plasma conduit maintenance procedures. He sat cross-legged against the wall, completely absorbed in his reading, occasionally muttering things like, "Oh, that's clever," or "I never thought of that approach before." The 3 Sauroch prisoners had spent most of those 2 hours simply watching him. They had expected him to break down eventually, to start crying or begging or demanding to be released. Instead, the human seemed perfectly content to use the time for studying, as if being locked in a high-security containment cell was just another part of his daily routine. Vextar paced back and forth across the small space, his large feet making soft clicking sounds on the metal floor. His scarred face showed confusion and growing frustration. "This makes no sense," he muttered. "Humans are supposed to be weak, frightened, easy to intimidate." "Maybe this one is broken," Kresh suggested, crouched in his preferred corner where he could watch both the human and the sealed exits. "Some kind of mental defect that makes him unable to feel fear properly." Zoldan, who had been quietly observing from his position near the center of the room, shook his head slowly. "No, look at his eyes when he reads. Look at how he moves. This human is not broken. He is simply focused on something he considers more important than his current situation." "More important than survival?" Vextar asked incredulously. "Apparently so," Zoldan replied thoughtfully. As if summoned by their conversation, Taman looked up from his tablet with a pleased expression. "Hey, I just figured something out. The plasma conduit design you guys use on Sauroch ships is really interesting. It's completely different from human designs, but actually more efficient in some ways." The 3 prisoners stared at him. Kresh was the first to find his voice. "How do you know about Sauroch ship designs?" "Oh, I looked them up," Taman said, gesturing to his tablet. "I have access to the station's technical database through my engineering credentials. Once you mentioned that Sauroch technology was superior in some areas, I got curious about what you meant." He turned his tablet around to show them a detailed schematic of a Sauroch vessel's power distribution system. "See, human ships use a grid-based plasma distribution network. It's reliable and easy to maintain, but it wastes a lot of energy through heat dissipation. Your design uses these flowing curves that follow the natural path of least resistance. Much more elegant." Zoldan found himself leaning forward despite his intention to remain detached. "You can access technical specifications for military vessels?" "Well, these aren't military specs exactly," Taman explained. "These are from civilian trade ships and research vessels. But the basic principles are the same, right? The way you channel plasma through organic curves instead of straight lines is really smart. It probably reduces energy loss by at least 15%. He swiped to another screen showing comparative efficiency charts. I've been running some calculations, and if human engineers could figure out how to manufacture conduits with those kinds of curves, our ships could travel maybe 20% further on the same fuel load. Vextar had stopped pacing and was now standing directly behind Taman, looking over his shoulder at the tablet screen. Despite himself, he was becoming interested in the human's analysis. Those curves are not just for efficiency, he said slowly. They follow the principles of life-flow harmony. Life-flow harmony? Taman asked, looking up with genuine curiosity. What's that? It is difficult to explain to someone who did not grow up with the concept, Vextar said, settling down closer to the human. His massive size made the movement look awkward, but his expression showed he was struggling to find the right words. Try me, Taman said eagerly. I love learning about different approaches to engineering problems. Vextar looked at his fellow prisoners uncertainly. Kresh gave a small shrug, while Zoldan nodded encouragingly. In Sauroch engineering, Vextar began carefully, we believe that all energy wants to flow like blood through a living body. Straight lines and sharp angles create resistance and pain. Curved paths that follow natural patterns create harmony and strength. Taman's eyes lit up. That's fascinating. So you're using biological principles as the basis for mechanical design. That could explain why your ships are so much quieter than human vessels. Our engines create all kinds of vibration and noise because we're fighting against the natural flow patterns. He started making rapid notes on his tablet. This could revolutionize human ship design. Have you ever tried applying life-flow harmony to other systems, like atmospheric processors or gravity generators? Of course, Kresh said, speaking up for the first time since the conversation had started. All Sauroch technology follows the same principles. It is the foundation of our entire civilization. Could you show me? Taman asked, holding out his tablet. I mean, if you don't mind sharing. I'm just really curious about how this works in practice. The three prisoners exchanged glances. They were supposed to be dangerous criminals, feared throughout the galaxy for their violent crimes. Yet here was this small human treating them like respected colleagues, asking to learn from their expertise as if their past actions didn't matter. Zoldan reached for the tablet first. I can show you some basic principles, he said. But you must understand this knowledge is sacred to our people. It is not usually shared with outsiders. I totally understand, Taman said seriously. I won't share anything you don't want me to share. I just want to learn. For the next hour, Zoldan walked Taman through the fundamental concepts of life-flow harmony as applied to engineering. He showed how Sauroch designers studied the way blood moved through reptilian bodies, how rivers carved paths through stone, how plants grew toward sunlight. All of these natural patterns were then translated into technological applications. Taman absorbed every detail, asking intelligent questions and making connections that impressed even Zoldan. When the human pointed out that certain mathematical formulas from human quantum theory could be used to predict optimal life flow patterns, Zoldan realized that this young engineer had a deeper understanding of the underlying principles than many Sauroch specialists. Your mind works differently than I expected, Zoldan admitted. Most aliens who encounter our technology try to change it to match their own understanding. You are trying to understand it on its own terms? Well, yeah, Taman said, as if it was obvious. I mean, your civilization has been developing this stuff for thousands of years, right? It would be pretty arrogant of me to think I could improve it without even understanding how it works first. Vextar, who had been listening to the entire exchange, found himself nodding in agreement. This is unusual. Most species dismiss Sauroch engineering as primitive because it does not match their expectations of how technology should look. That's their loss, Taman said firmly. This is some of the most sophisticated engineering I've ever seen. The fact that it looks natural and organic doesn't make it less advanced. If anything, it makes it more advanced because you've figured out how to work with natural laws instead of fighting against them. Kresh, who had remained mostly silent throughout the technical discussion, suddenly spoke up. Human, why do you treat us with such respect? Do you not know what crimes we have committed? Taman looked at him thoughtfully. I know you're prisoners being transported to a penal colony. I assume you must have done something pretty serious to end up here. But right now, in this moment, you're teaching me incredibly valuable things about engineering and design philosophy. That's what matters to me right now. He gestured around the sealed chamber. Look, we're all stuck here together until station security figures out how to fix my mistake. We can spend that time being afraid or angry or hostile, or we can spend it learning from each other. I know which option seems more useful to me. The three Sorok sat in silence, processing this simple but profound statement. In their culture, strength was measured by the ability to dominate others, to inspire fear and command respect through force. Yet this small, unarmed human was showing them a different kind of strength entirely. Outside the containment chamber, station security teams were still working frantically to restore normal operations. Inside, three of the most dangerous criminals in the sector were discovering that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe was simple curiosity combined with genuine respect for knowledge, regardless of its source. The fourth hour of their confinement had brought an unexpected transformation to the sealed chamber. What had started as a tense situation between predators and prey had evolved into something resembling a university classroom. Taman sat in the center with his tablet, while the three massive Sorok prisoners had arranged themselves in a rough circle around him. So you were actually a genetic engineer before all this, Taman said to Vextar, his voice filled with genuine amazement. That's incredible. I've always wanted to understand how biological systems work at the molecular level. Vextar shifted uncomfortably, his scarred face showing conflicted emotions. I was. Before my crimes brought dishonor to my family and my profession, I spent 15 years studying the genetic patterns that control growth, healing, and adaptation in living creatures. What kind of research were you doing? Taman asked, leaning forward with interest. I was trying to enhance the natural abilities of Sorok warriors, Vextar admitted. Stronger muscles, faster reflexes, better healing. The military wanted soldiers who could survive injuries that would kill ordinary beings. Taman nodded thoughtfully. That sounds like really complex work. The interaction between different genetic systems must have been incredibly difficult to map and control. It was, Vextar said, surprised by the human's understanding. Most people think genetic engineering is simply about changing one thing to get one result. But every change affects dozens of other systems. Increase muscle density, and you might accidentally damage the cardiovascular system. Improve healing speed, and you might create cells that grow too fast and become cancerous. That's exactly what I was thinking, Taman said excitedly. It's like trying to tune a musical instrument where every string is connected to every other string. Change one note and the whole harmony shifts. Vexitar stared at the human in amazement. That is exactly what it is like. I have never heard anyone describe it so clearly. Taman pulled up a new screen on his tablet showing some basic human genetic research data. We're just starting to understand genetics compared to your people, but human scientists have been working on some similar problems. Look at this study about muscle development in low-gravity environments. As Vextar examined the data, Kresh spoke up from his corner. You said earlier that you were interested in metallurgy as well, human. Please call me Taman, he said with a smile. And yes, I love learning about materials science. It's so important for spacecraft construction, but I feel like there's still so much we don't understand. Kresh moved closer, his black scales catching the light as he settled into a more comfortable position. I was a metallurgist before my imprisonment. I discovered new ways to combine different metals to create alloys with properties that neither material possessed alone. Really? Taman's eyes lit up. That sounds amazing. What kind of properties were you able to create? Strength without weight, Kresh said, his voice taking on a note of professional pride. Flexibility without weakness. Metal that could conduct heat in one direction but not another. Metal that could change its properties based on temperature or electrical current. Taman stared at him in awe. That's incredible. Human metallurgy is nowhere near that advanced. We're still struggling with basic problems like creating materials that are both lightweight and strong, enough for deep space construction. The secret is understanding how different atomic structures want to interact with each other. Kresh explained, warming to his subject. Most metallurgists try to force materials to behave the way they want. But metals have their own preferences, their own natural affinities. Work with those preferences instead of against them, and you can create materials that seem impossible. Like the life flow harmony that Vextar was telling me about, Taman said, making the connection. You're applying the same principles to metallurgy that Sarok engineers use for energy systems. Exactly, Kresh said, pleased that the human understood so quickly. All Sarok science is based on the same fundamental truth. Work with nature instead of fighting it, and you can achieve things that brute force alone cannot accomplish. Zoldan, who had been quietly listening to these exchanges, finally spoke. Before my crimes, I was a theoretical physicist. I studied the mathematics that govern the behavior of space and time themselves. Taman turned to him eagerly. What kind of theoretical physics? Quantum mechanics? Relativity? Dimensional theory? All of those and more, Zoldan replied. But my specialty was understanding how different dimensions interact with each other. I believed that our normal three-dimensional space was just one layer of a much more complex reality. That's fascinating, Taman said, pulling up some human physics equations on his tablet. Human scientists have theories about extra dimensions too, but we can only detect their effects indirectly. We can't actually observe them or interact with them. That is because you are approaching the problem incorrectly, Zoldan said, studying the equations on the screen. You are trying to force higher dimensions to behave like the three dimensions you understand. But each dimension has its own rules, its own nature. He gestured for the tablet and Taman handed it over willingly. Zoldan began sketching mathematical symbols and diagrams, his clawed fingers moving with surprising delicacy across the screen. See here, he said, showing Taman a complex three-dimensional model. Human mathematics assumes that all dimensions follow the same geometric principles. But what if some dimensions curve while others remain straight? What if some dimensions flow like rivers while others stand still like mountains? Taman studied the diagram intently, his engineering mind working to understand the concepts. So you're saying that different dimensions might have completely different properties, and we need to understand each one individually before we can see how they work together? Precisely, Zoldan said, clearly impressed by Taman's quick grasp of the idea. And if you can learn to work with each dimension according to its own nature, you can manipulate space and time in ways that seem impossible. Is that what got you in trouble? Taman asked gently. Trying to manipulate higher dimensions. Zoldan's expression darkened. I built a device that could create small tears in the fabric of spacetime. I thought I could use it to solve energy shortages by drawing power directly from higher dimensions. Instead, I nearly destroyed an entire star system when the dimensional barrier became unstable. Oh, Taman said quietly, that would definitely be considered dangerous. Thousands of people died because of my arrogance, Zoldan continued. I thought I understood forces that were beyond my comprehension. My theoretical knowledge was not enough to predict the practical consequences of my actions. Taman was quiet for a moment, processing this information. But you learned from the mistake, right? Now you understand more about how these forces actually work in practice. I have spent years in prison thinking about what went wrong, Zoldan admitted. I believe I understand my errors now. The mathematics were correct, but I failed to account for the way different dimensional layers influence each other over time. So in theory, the same technique could work if it was applied more carefully, Taman asked. Perhaps, Zoldan said cautiously, but the risks would still be enormous. The power to manipulate dimensions is the power to create or destroy worlds. That's exactly why we need people like you studying it, Taman said firmly. The universe is full of dangerous forces. Black holes, supernovas, quantum singularities. We can't make them go away by ignoring them. The only way to stay safe is to understand them better. The three Sarok prisoners looked at each other in amazement. This human was not only unafraid of their violent pasts, he was actively encouraging them to continue the very research that had led to their imprisonment. You truly believe that knowledge is more important than safety? Fextar asked. I believe that knowledge is safety, Taman replied. My grandmother used to tell me that ignorance is the most dangerous thing in the universe. You can't solve problems you don't understand, and you can't avoid dangers you don't know about. He looked around at the three massive beings surrounding him. You three have made mistakes, serious ones that hurt people, but you've also learned things that could help prevent similar tragedies in the future. That knowledge shouldn't be wasted just because of past errors. Kresh shook his head slowly. You are unlike any being I have ever encountered, Taman Kim. Most creatures fear those who have power over forces they do not understand. Fear doesn't solve problems, Taman said simply. Curiosity does. Questions do. Working together to find better answers does. Outside their sealed chamber, station security was finally making progress on overriding the containment system. But inside, 4 minds from 2 different species had discovered something far more valuable than freedom. They had found the universal language that connected all intelligent beings, regardless of their past or their differences, the language of discovery, of learning, and of shared wonder at the complexity and beauty of the universe around them. The 5th hour brought an unexpected development. The lights in their chamber had started flickering in strange patterns, and a low humming sound was coming from the walls. Taman looked up from his tablet, where he had been taking notes on Sarok dimensional theory, and frowned at the unusual behavior of their prison. "That doesn't sound right," he said, standing up and placing his hand against the nearest wall. The metal felt warm, much warmer than it should have been. The containment system shouldn't be making those kinds of noises. Zoldan tilted his head, listening carefully to the humming sound. His experience with dimensional physics had given him a keen sense for unusual energy patterns. "That frequency is increasing," he observed. "Whatever is causing this disturbance is getting worse, not better." Vexitar moved to a different wall, pressing his ear against the metal surface. His enhanced Sarok hearing could pick up vibrations that the others might miss. "There are secondary harmonics," he reported. "Multiple systems are malfunctioning, not just the containment field." Taman pulled up the station schematic on his tablet, his engineering training taking over as he tried to understand what might be happening. "When I accidentally triggered the emergency lockdown, I might have caused more damage than just sealing us in here. Let me see if I can access the station's diagnostic systems." His fingers moved quickly across the tablet screen, navigating through various technical databases. His junior engineer credentials gave him access to maintenance and diagnostic information, though not to the high-level control systems that might allow him to fix the problem directly. "Oh no," Taman said quietly, staring at the data scrolling across his screen. "This is really bad." "What is it?" Kresh asked, moving closer to look at the tablet. "The lockdown I triggered didn't just seal the containment barriers," Taman explained, his voice tight with worry. "It also activated the emergency quantum isolation protocol. The station's main power grid is trying to create a quantum containment field around this entire section." Zoldan's eyes widened in alarm. A quantum containment field of this size would require enormous amounts of energy. "If the calculations are wrong, the whole station could be destroyed," Taman finished, "and everyone on it." The 4 beings looked at each other in growing horror as the implications sank in. Outside their sealed chamber, thousands of people from dozens of different species were going about their daily lives, completely unaware that a cascading quantum failure was building toward a catastrophic explosion. "How long do we have?" Vexitar asked. Taman checked the diagnostic readings again. "Based on the rate of energy buildup, maybe 2 hours before the quantum field becomes unstable. After that," he didn't need to finish the sentence. "Can the station engineers fix it from the outside?" Kresh asked. "I don't think so," Taman said, scrolling through more technical data. "The quantum isolation protocol was designed to contain the most dangerous possible scenarios. Once it's activated, all external control systems are cut off to prevent tampering. The only way to shut it down is from inside the containment area." "From in here," Zoldan said grimly. "From in here," Taman confirmed. They stood in silence for a moment, contemplating the enormity of the situation. Then, almost simultaneously, all 4 of them seemed to reach the same conclusion. "Well," Taman said, settling back down with his tablet, "I guess we'd better figure out how to fix this." "You want to try to solve this problem?" Vexitar asked incredulously. "We are prisoners and a junior engineer trapped in a sealed room. What can we possibly do that the station's expert technical teams cannot?" "We can work together," Taman said simply. "You 3 know more about advanced science than anyone else on this station. I know human engineering principles and I have access to the diagnostic systems. If we combine our knowledge, maybe we can find a solution that nobody else would think of." Zoldan moved closer, his scientific curiosity overriding his pessimism. "Show me the quantum field specifications." Taman pulled up the relevant data, and Zoldan studied it carefully. "The field generators are using a standard containment algorithm," he observed. "It creates a stable quantum bubble by maintaining perfect symmetry in all directions." "That's the problem," Taman realized. "The containment area isn't symmetrical. This section of the station has irregular angles and different materials in the walls. The quantum field can't maintain perfect symmetry, so it's trying to compensate by increasing power output, which creates more instability, which requires more power, Kresh added, understanding the deadly cycle. Eventually the generators will overload. Unless we can find a way to stabilize the field without relying on perfect symmetry, Vextar suggested. Is that even possible? Taman asked. Zoldan was already working on the problem, his claws tracing complex mathematical equations in the air. In theory, yes. Instead of forcing the quantum field to maintain artificial symmetry, we could design it to follow natural flow patterns. Like water finding the most efficient path down a mountainside. Life flow harmony, Taman said, making the connection. Apply the same principles you use in Sarok engineering to quantum field management. Exactly, Zoldan said, his excitement growing. But it would require completely reprogramming the field generators while they're running. One mistake and the feedback could trigger an immediate catastrophic failure. What kind of programming would be needed? Taman asked. The quantum field equations would need to be rewritten to account for irregular containment boundaries, Zoldan explained. Then the power distribution system would need to be modified to deliver energy in flowing patterns instead of rigid grids. I can handle the power distribution, Kresh offered. If you can give me the flow patterns you need, I can calculate how to modify the energy conduits to match them. And I can work on the biological aspects, Vextar added. Quantum fields interact with living tissue in complex ways. If there are people near the containment area, we need to make sure the modified field won't harm them. Taman looked around at his three unlikely collaborators. So we're really going to try this? Try to save the station by completely reinventing quantum containment theory in less than 2 hours? Do we have a choice? Zoldan asked. Not really, Taman admitted. But you know what? I actually think we can do this. We have the best possible team for this kind of problem. He opened a new workspace on his tablet and created separate sections for each aspect of the challenge. Okay, here's how I think we should approach this. Zoldan, you work on the theoretical framework for adaptive quantum fields. Kresh, you design the power distribution modifications. Vextar, you calculate the biological safety parameters. I'll handle the integration and programming. And if our solution doesn't work? Kresh asked. Then at least we tried, Taman said. But I have a good feeling about this. Human engineers have a saying. The best solutions come from combining different perspectives. We have perspectives from 2 different species, 4 different scientific specialties, and years of experience between us. Plus we have motivation, Vextar pointed out grimly. If we fail, we die along with everyone else. There is that, Taman agreed cheerfully. But let's focus on the positive aspects. We're about to either solve an impossible problem or die trying. Either way, it's going to be educational. The 3 Sorok looked at each other and shook their heads in amazement. Only a human would find the prospect of imminent death educational rather than terrifying. But as they began working on the problem, each contributing their unique expertise to the collaborative effort, they started to understand something profound about human nature. Humans didn't just refuse to give up in the face of impossible odds. They actually seemed to get more creative and optimistic the worse the situation became. Outside their chamber, station alarms were beginning to sound as the engineering teams detected the growing quantum instability. Emergency evacuation procedures were being prepared, and panic was starting to spread through the civilian population. Inside the chamber, 4 beings from 2 different worlds were calmly working together to rewrite the fundamental laws of quantum physics, treating the most dangerous crisis in the station's history as simply another interesting problem to solve. The humming from the walls was getting louder, and the lights were flickering more frequently. Time was running out, but for the first time since the lockdown had begun, all 4 of them were smiling. With only 45 minutes remaining before catastrophic failure, the sealed chamber had transformed into the most unlikely research laboratory in the galaxy. Taman sat in the center with his tablet connected to the station's systems, while the 3 Sorok prisoners worked frantically on different aspects of their desperate solution. I've got the theoretical framework mapped out, Zoldan announced, his claws scratching complex equations directly onto the metal wall. The adaptive quantum field can work, but only if we can synchronize all the modifications perfectly. Even a few seconds of delay between systems could cause the whole thing to collapse. The power distribution calculations are ready, Kresh reported from his corner, where he had been working with metal samples from his prison restraints to test conductivity patterns. I can reroute the energy flows through the existing conduits, but we'll need to overload 3 secondary systems to provide enough power for the transition. And the biological safety parameters are within acceptable limits, Vextar added, looking up from his own calculations. The modified quantum field will actually be less harmful to living tissue than the current containment system. The natural flow patterns are more compatible with organic neural networks. Taman nodded, his fingers flying across his tablet as he integrated all of their work into a single comprehensive solution. Okay, I think I've got everything combined into a working program. But there's one problem. The modifications need to be implemented manually, and they have to happen in a very specific sequence. He showed them a schematic of the chamber's layout. There are 4 quantum field generators, 1 in each corner of the room. Someone needs to physically access each generator and install the new programming while the others coordinate the power rerouting and field adjustments. How physical are we talking? Kresh asked. Very physical, Taman said grimly. The generators are behind access panels that require manual override. Once the process starts, whoever is doing the installation will be directly exposed to quantum field fluctuations. It's going to be dangerous. How dangerous? Vextar wanted to know. There's about a 30% chance that anyone directly touching the generators during the modification process will be disintegrated, Taman said honestly. And if something goes wrong, we all die anyway. The 4 beings looked at each other in silence. Outside, they could hear the station's emergency alarms getting louder and more frequent. Evacuation announcements were being broadcast in multiple languages as station personnel tried to move thousands of civilians to safety. I'll do the installations, Taman said, standing up and pocketing his tablet. This whole situation is my fault anyway. If someone has to take the risk, it should be me. Absolutely not, Vextar said immediately. You are the only one who understands the overall integration system. If something goes wrong during the process, you're the only one who can make real-time adjustments to compensate. He's right, Zoldan agreed. You need to stay centrally located where you can monitor all systems and coordinate our efforts. The installations require strength and dexterity, not engineering knowledge. I am the fastest and most agile, Kresh pointed out. I should handle the generator modifications. And I have the most experience with dangerous energy systems, Vextar countered. My genetic engineering work required me to handle unstable biological fields. I know how to work safely around quantum fluctuations. We don't have time to argue about this, Taman said, checking his tablet as more alarms sounded. 38 minutes left. We need to make a decision now. Zoldan stepped forward, his scarred face showing grim determination. I will do the installations. This situation exists because I failed to properly understand the consequences of my dimensional research years ago. If I die fixing a quantum crisis, perhaps it will balance the scales for all the people who died because of my mistakes. Zoldan, no, Taman said firmly. Your past mistakes don't mean you deserve to die. We need you alive to help prevent similar disasters in the future. The human is correct, Vextar said. Self-sacrifice driven by guilt is not wisdom. It is waste. Then we all do it together, Kresh suggested. Each of us takes 1 generator. Same risk shared equally. Taman shook his head. That won't work. The sequence has to be precise and we need someone coordinating from the central position. But... He paused, looking at his tablet screen with a thoughtful expression. Actually, there might be another way. What do you mean? Zoldan asked. What if we don't try to minimize the risk? Taman said, his voice getting excited. What if we use the risk as part of the solution? The 3 Sorok stared at him. Explain, Vextar demanded. The quantum field fluctuations that make this dangerous are also sources of enormous energy, Taman said, pulling up new calculations on his screen. If we could harness that energy and feed it back into the system, we might be able to complete the modifications much faster. That would require direct physical contact with the quantum generators during peak fluctuation, Zoldan said slowly. The energy exposure would be incredible. But manageable if we work as a team, Taman continued. Vextar, your genetic modifications gave you enhanced healing and radiation resistance, right? You could handle the energy exposure better than any of us. Possibly, Vextar admitted. And Kresh, your metallurgy skills mean you understand how energy flows through different materials. You could guide the power distribution in real time. True, Kresh acknowledged. Zoldan, your dimensional physics knowledge would let you predict and compensate for quantum fluctuations as they happen. I could try, Zoldan said cautiously. And I can coordinate everything from the central systems and make adjustments as needed, Taman finished. Instead of trying to avoid the dangerous energy, we use it as our tool. That's completely insane, Kresh said. It's also brilliant, Zoldan added reluctantly. The quantum feedback loop would actually stabilize the field modifications instead of destabilizing them. Assuming we don't all die in the first 30 seconds, Vextar pointed out. There is that possibility, Taman agreed cheerfully. But the alternative is certain death for everyone on the station. I'd rather take a chance on an insane plan that might work than wait for a safe plan that definitely won't. Outside their chamber, they could see station security teams running past the observation windows. Emergency lights were flashing throughout the facility, and the evacuation announcements had become more urgent. 32 minutes, Taman announced, checking the countdown on his tablet. All right, Vextar said, moving toward the first generator panel. If we're going to do this, let's do it properly. What's the sequence? Taman called up the installation procedure on his screen. Vextar, you start with generator 1 and work clockwise. Kresh, you handle the power rerouting from the main distribution panel. Zoldan, you monitor dimensional stability and call out fluctuation patterns. I'll coordinate from the central system and make real-time adjustments. When do we start? Kresh asked, positioning himself next to the power distribution controls. The moment I give the signal, Taman said. Remember, timing is everything. If we're not synchronized perfectly, the quantum feedback will tear the station apart instead of stabilizing it. He looked around at his three unlikely partners, a convicted genetic engineer, a disgraced metallurgist, and a failed dimensional physicist. 6 hours ago, they had been dangerous criminals being transported to prison. Now they were about to attempt the most complex quantum engineering project in galactic history. Ready? Taman asked. 3 massive reptilian heads nodded in unison. Then let's save some lives, Taman said, and pressed the activation sequence. The chamber filled with blinding light as quantum energy began to surge through every surface. The humming sound became a roar that seemed to come from the very fabric of space itself. And 4 beings, working together with perfect coordination despite having known each other for less than 6 hours, began the desperate race to rewrite the laws of physics before time ran out. Through the observation windows, station security personnel watched in amazement as the most dangerous criminals on the facility worked alongside a young human engineer to save thousands of lives. The sight was so unexpected, so impossible, that many of them forgot about the evacuation procedures entirely. They stood transfixed, watching heroes work in scales and skin, proving that courage and wisdom could emerge from the most unlikely places when the universe needed them most. The quantum energy surge lasted exactly 17 minutes and 43 seconds. When the blinding light finally faded and the roaring sound diminished to a gentle hum, the 4 beings in the sealed chamber found themselves still alive, still breathing, and surrounded by the soft glow of successfully stabilized quantum fields. Taman looked up from his tablet, where green status indicators were lighting up across all systems. I can't believe that actually worked, he said, his voice filled with wonder and exhaustion. Vextar stepped away from the generator panel, his scales showing scorch marks, but his expression triumphant. The quantum field is completely stable. Energy output is at optimal levels, and there are no fluctuation warnings anywhere in the system. Power distribution is operating at 97% efficiency, Kresh reported, reading from the control panel he had been managing. Better than the original design specifications. Zoldan slumped against the wall, his normally composed demeanor showing signs of the strain they had all endured. The dimensional barriers are solid. No tears, no instabilities, no signs of cascade failure. We actually did it. Outside their chamber, the station's emergency alarms had fallen silent. The flashing red lights had returned to normal illumination, and they could hear the sounds of normal activity resuming throughout the facility. Look, Taman said, pointing toward the observation windows. A crowd of station personnel had gathered outside their sealed chamber. Security officers, engineers, medical staff, and administrators from dozens of different species stood watching them with expressions of amazement and disbelief. Some were pointing at monitoring equipment that showed the impossible success of their improvised solution. Others were simply staring at the four unlikely heroes who had saved thousands of lives. "I think they want to know what happened," Kresh observed. Before anyone could respond, the containment barriers began to rise. The emergency lockdown was finally being lifted, not because of external override procedures, but because the quantum crisis that had triggered it no longer existed. Station Commander Yarrick, a tall blue-skinned Andorian with silver hair, was the first to enter their former prison. His expression showed a mixture of gratitude, confusion, and professional curiosity as he approached the group. "I need to understand what happened here," he said without preamble. "Our best engineers were preparing to evacuate the entire station. Our quantum physics specialist said the cascade failure was impossible to stop. Yet somehow you four not only prevented a catastrophe but actually improved our containment system beyond original specifications." Taman stood up, brushing dust off his uniform. "Well, it was really a team effort, Commander. We just applied some creative thinking to the problem." "Creative thinking?" Commander Yarrick repeated slowly. "You rewrote fundamental quantum field equations in less than an hour using principles that our scientists didn't even know existed." "Actually, your scientists probably did know the principles," Taman said modestly. "They just hadn't thought to combine them in this particular way. Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to see new solutions." The commander turned to the three Solrock prisoners. "And you three? Your records show you were being transported to a maximum security penal colony for crimes involving dangerous scientific experimentation." "That is correct," Zoldan said simply. "Yet when faced with a crisis that could have killed you along with everyone else, you chose to use your expertise to save lives rather than escape or cause additional chaos. What else would we do?" Vextar asked, genuinely puzzled by the question. "Allow thousands of innocent people to die because of our past mistakes? That would have been the action of monsters, not scientists." Commander Yarrick studied the four beings for a long moment. "The Galactic Council is going to want a full report on this incident. The quantum field modifications you developed could revolutionize energy containment systems throughout known space. More importantly, your actions have prevented what could have been one of the worst disasters in station history." "Does this mean they're not going to prison?" Taman asked hopefully. "That will be up to the council to decide," the commander replied. "But I will be recommending that their sentences be reviewed in light of their heroic actions today. Scientists who can solve impossible problems and save lives are too valuable to waste in prison cells." Over the following days, news of the incident spread throughout the galactic community. The story of a clumsy human engineer who accidentally triggered a station-wide crisis, then collaborated with alien criminals to develop a solution that saved thousands of lives, became one of the most talked-about events of the year. Taman found himself promoted to senior engineer and assigned to a new research team focused on applying Solrock life-flow harmony principles to human technology. His supervisor, who had originally worried about his tendency toward accidents, now praised his ability to find innovative solutions under pressure. The three Solrock prisoners had their sentences officially commuted by the Galactic Council. Vextar was offered a position with the Interspecies Medical Research Foundation, where his genetic engineering expertise could be used to develop new treatments for previously incurable diseases. Kresh joined a joint human Solrock technology development project, working to create new materials that combine the best aspects of both species engineering approaches. Zoldan became a special advisor on dimensional physics safety protocols, helping to prevent the kind of disasters that had resulted from his earlier work. 6 months later, Tamin received a message from his grandmother Yunji back on Earth. She had heard about his adventure through the news reports that had reached human space. "My dear grandson," her message read, "I always told you that knowledge was the one thing no one could take away from you. But now I see that knowledge shared with others becomes something even more powerful. You have proven that learning and curiosity can build bridges between any differences, no matter how great they seem. I am proud of you for showing the galaxy that the best response to any crisis is to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep working together to find better answers." The former containment chamber where their unlikely partnership had begun was converted into a research facility. A small plaque near the entrance read simply, "The reading room where curiosity conquered fear." Taman often returned to that room when he was working on particularly difficult problems. He would sit in the same spot where he had calmly read his textbook, while surrounded by what everyone else considered mortal danger. And he would remember the lesson he had learned that day. The universe was full of dangerous situations and impossible problems, but it was also full of intelligent beings who were willing to share their knowledge and work together toward solutions. Fear might be a natural response to the unknown, but curiosity was always more productive, and sometimes the most unlikely partnerships could accomplish things that no one had ever thought possible. The incident became known throughout the galaxy as the Reading Room Revolution, not because it involved violence or political upheaval, but because it proved that the simple act of continuing to learn and remaining open to new perspectives could transform any situation, no matter how hopeless it might seem. Years later, when young engineers and scientists from dozens of different species studied the quantum field modifications developed during those desperate hours, they would always be told the same thing. The breakthrough had not come from superior technology or advanced mathematics, but from four beings who were willing to combine their different knowledge and experiences in pursuit of a common goal. The human approach to crisis management, turning obstacles into opportunities, finding ways to collaborate rather than compete, and maintaining optimism even in the face of certain disaster, became a subject of academic study throughout the galactic community. But for Taemin Kim, it had always been simple common sense. When faced with a problem you couldn't solve alone, you found people who knew things you didn't know, and you worked together until you found an answer. After all, his grandmother had been right all along. Knowledge truly was the one thing no one could ever take away from you. And when that knowledge was shared freely with others, it became the most powerful force in the universe. Even more powerful than fear, especially more powerful than fear.